Okay.
Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are. Thank you all for finding the time and attending today's webinar. During today's webinar, David Coleman, our Director of Product Marketing, will be discussing why 5 GHz Wi-Fi is still your best friend. During the session, we will cover how DFS channels work, why 5 GHz is actually your best friend, how to incorporate DFS into your 5 GHz plan, and how to leverage our dual 5 GHz access points. A couple of items before we begin. At this time, all participants are in listen-only mode. If you have any questions during the presentation, please submit them at any time using the Q&A window on your screen. We will do our best to answer as many questions as we can at the end of the presentation. This webinar will be recorded and available to you in the next 24 hours. Also, if you experience any technical difficulties during today's presentation, please try refreshing your screen. Now, without further ado, we will turn our time over to David. David, the floor is all yours.
Thank you, Mitch, and thanks for everybody for showing up today virtually. Hopefully we can see each other soon and in person, but we're going to do it virtually once again. So obviously the topic is why 5 GHz Wi-Fi is still your best friend, and we're going to delve into that. But first, a few little quick things. If you don't know who I am the Director of Product Marketing at Extreme Networks. I came over with the Aerohive acquisition. I've been here at Extreme now for a full year. I am certified wireless network expert number 4. There's my Twitter address at Mr. Multipath. A lot of people laugh at me when I show that, but the Wi-Fi community is actually very active on Twitter, so always looking for more followers. I'm also the co-author of this big fat book about Wi-Fi, the CWNA Study Guides, 5th edition. And it is a vendor neutral book about a Wi-Fi. It's not an extreme book. It's a kind of a reference guide all about Wi-Fi. So if you haven't picked it up, we'd love for you to pick it up. So with that, let's get a little bit of summary and a lead in into our discussion today. So unless you've been living under a rock, which some of us have, I guess, during COVID, the Wi-Fi Alliance introduced a new generational Wi-Fi naming system that helps users better understand the experience they can expect. So instead of using terminology like 802.11n, AC, AX, which a lot of people have no idea what that means, they're just labeling it Wi-Fi 4, 5, and 6. So the latest and greatest technology that's been out now for a little over a year is 802.11ax, high efficiency technology, which has made a lot of efficiency enhancements to Wi-Fi. And it's been labeled probably more by the new marketing name of Wi-Fi 6. It is the next generation of Wi-Fi technology. And that is the Wi-Fi Alliance's name for it. And that's how it's also certified. What has also been announced, you probably may have not heard, is that the FCC in the United States and a couple other regulatory bodies have announced that they are opening up the 6 GHz frequency band starting next year in 2021. And the Wi-Fi Alliance will begin certifying APs when they're available late next year to transmit in the 6 GHz band. And that certification is going to be called Wi-Fi 6E. It's an extension of it because this is going to be a pure 802.11ax frequency band. There's not going to be any legacy capabilities available. It's pure 802.11ax, that's Wi-Fi 6E. Now, there's a boatload of new channels coming, and we're not going to spend a lot of time on 6 GHz because the topic is about 5 GHz, and you're going to see why here in a minute. We're all excited about 6 GHz because of all this new frequency space that is coming in the United States. You can see 59 new 20 megahertz channels, and in Europe, 500 megahertz of new frequency space is coming as well. So this new clean spectrum, and we're very excited about that. However, there's some things that you need to think about in regards to 6 gigahertz coming later on. And the big question that you really need to think about a lot is, what about the existing Wi-Fi clients? Okay. Right now, there are 15 billion Wi-Fi clients that don't support that here on Earth, and maybe some in space, that don't support 6 gigahertz. And why is that important? Because none of the existing clients that you have and own today will ever be able to connect to a 6 gigahertz radio in a Wi-Fi 6 AP. And you need to think about that, okay? Only future Wi-Fi 6E clients that also have 6 gigahertz radios built into them will be able to connect. Those don't exist yet. So clients with 6 gigahertz radios will be slow to the market and will take a long time to saturate the enterprise client population, okay? This is just a fact. The legacy client population of 15 billion clients that exist right now is going to be around for a very, very, very long time. And anybody that's been on Wi-Fi for a while understands this. They understand that legacy clients, even though access points might have a shelf life of 3 to 5 years, legacy clients tend to stick around for 10 years and sometimes more. Now, this actually, let me give you some examples of that. Jumped ahead real quick, sorry about that. Some examples is the legacy client population. And what we're looking at right here is our maximum client capabilities view in ExtremeCloud IQ. And this is one extreme higher education EDU customer. And you can see, you know, what the mixture is of the existing client population. And this customer is recently upgraded to Wi-Fi 6 access points and AX, but I want to show you what their client population looks like. Currently, less than 6% of the university's client population has even upgraded to 802.11ax. I'm not talking about 6 gigahertz. I'm talking about 802.11ax clients that can transmit on the 2.4 and 5 gigahertz band. So we don't even have 6 gigahertz clients. The new Wi-Fi 6 technology is available on the legacy bands, but as you can see, look where the bulk of the clients are. It's using technology that's 5 to 10 years old, 802.11ac and 802.11n. So that's kind of why 5 gigahertz is going to be important, because the legacy client population of 15 billion clients isn't going anywhere anytime soon, okay? Now, let's get into this. First, let's talk about the 2.4 gigahertz band, the first Wi-Fi band, okay? We all know there's only 14 channels, but in reality, you can only use 3 channels that are non-overlapping, channels 1, 6, and 11. And that has to, and that's the whole reason we do channel reuse patterns, so you don't have overlapping frequency space. But the question is does RF just stop? And the answer is no. I guarantee you, if you have 2 APs in the same channel, like channel 1 right here, they're going to hear each other. And if they hear each other, they have to defer, and that consumes airtime. And there's actually a name for that. Most of you know, it's co-channel interference. But that's just Wi-Fi working the way it's supposed to work, but it consumes airtime, and it's almost impossible to prevent this in the 2.4 band. And what a lot of people don't understand is that CCI is not static. It's always changing, and that's because clients are always the top cause of co-channel interference. So if you only have 3 channels, let's just pretend those 2 APs on channel 1 couldn't hear each other. I guarantee you, if one of the clients was transmitting that was connected to one of the APs, it's affecting other clients and other APs on the same channel. Basically meaning that you cannot prevent CCI, co-channel interference, in the 2.4 band. And the bottom line is this: 2.4 gigahertz should be considered a best effort band, period. Only put old legacy 2.4 gigahertz clients on that band and IoT clients. And this is one of the reasons why already 5 gigahertz is your best friend. 5 gigahertz is your best friend because there's a whole bunch more channels, and if you use all the channels, you can potentially prevent or at least mitigate co-channel interference, where APs or clients in the same channel hear each other and have to defer. And that can be accomplished. So you can see there's 24 or 25 channels here, 20 megahertz channels in the 5 gigahertz band. Here I have a channel reuse pattern. I'm not even using all of them here. I'm using about 2/3 of them. But in this case, you can see the distance between two APs on the same channel. There's about 8 or 9 APs as well. Then if you add in wall attenuation and everything else, the odds of these APs and their connected clients hearing each other goes way, way down. So with proper design and using all the channels, you can prevent co-channel interference, which has always been one of the #1 enemies in Wi-Fi design. Now, and to achieve this, in most cases, you need to use the dynamic frequency channels, which is what we're going to talk about. But by default, very often, they're not turned on. And the good news now is almost all clients support 5 gigahertz clients are going to support these channels as well. You should use these channels. Now, so what are dynamic frequency channels, the DFS channels? Well, if you look at your entire 5 gigahertz band right here, each one of those is a 20 megahertz channel, and those are called the uni bands. So this is just the name, but the uni 2A and the uni 2C band are known as the DFS channels. And these channels, it's all about radar avoidance, okay? We must protect wireless LAN communications from interfering with military or weather radar systems. And if radar pulses are detected on any of these DFS channels, access points and clients are not allowed to transmit at the same time, and they actually have to leave the channel, okay? Now, the rules on how to transmit in the DF channels are going to vary by region. It might be different between, they're definitely different between Europe and the United States. However, the goal is to avoid interference with radar. And many radar systems are protected by DFS regulations, including radar on boats, weather radar, and military radar. One of the things that really kind of surprised me is a lot of the radar on shipping. We've seen that especially quite a lot over in Amsterdam, for example, or anywhere where there's boats and shipping ports. DFS channels can be affected by the radar there. Now, please note that DFS requirements don't just, these are regulatory requirements that are enforced by like the FCC or ETSI in Europe. They don't just apply to Wi-Fi radios. So if there's other transmitters transmitting in these in this frequency range, they're not allowed to interfere with radar as well. Now, to keep going on here, we have, let's talk about this a little bit differently. I mentioned there are regulatory. So in Europe, the good news is you have to get your APs and clients certified. You have to prove to the regulatory body that they will abide by the rules and will not interfere with the radar. In Europe, the certification process is fast and quick. So when a vendor like Extreme comes out with a new access point, guess what? Boom, you can start transmitting on these DFS channels right away. And as soon as enterprise class APs hit the marketplace, and that's a great thing. Not so much in the United States, and this has been a problem for a while. It's a secondary certification and separate certification in the United States, meaning there's a 4 to 6 month backlog to get APs certified just to transmit on the DFS channel. So if Extreme Networks ships you our brand new AP, let's say AP410C that it comes out. It's been out for a while now, but let's just say it was brand new today, and we ship it today. It's not going to support DFS right away because we have to then turn around and get it certified again. So what that means is initially when you get brand new APs and you mount them in the ceiling, you're only going to have 8 or 9 channels that you're going to use in a 5 gigahertz channel plan, and which means you're not taking advantage of all the existing 5 gigahertz channels. And now the good news is 4 to 6 months, we get them certified, and then there's a firmware update, boom, no problem. You can immediately start using the DFS channels, and every vendor is the same. Okay, so if any vendor ever tries to tell you, oh, you know, these guys don't do DFS, it's just marketing FUD. Okay, eventually they will. Now, that being said, here's the problem. The problem is simply this. Then everybody has this problem. A customer deploys new technology, brand new APs, right? You know, as soon as they ship, and they deploy it, and they don't support the DFS channels initially. And then they can turn them on in like 6 months once they've been certified, but the customers never do. And we see this time and time again, where we have lots of customers that never take advantage of all this great frequency space that is available in the 5 gigahertz band. And it's simply because of the backlog in the United States. So let's get into how DFS actually works, DFS operations. So it's going to, once again, the regulations will be a little bit different between Europe and the United States and other regions of the country, but typically they define operations that involve a master and a device and a client device for radar detection. And it's a coordinated system. And usually the AP is going to function as that master device, and the client device is kind of subordinate to it. Now, that being said, the client devices don't have to do radar detection, but they can, and then they can report that information up to the AP. But that is not a requirement. So a little bit deeper into how, we're going to get in a little bit deeper now into how all this actually works. So a big part of this is what is known as the channel availability check. So let's get a little bit of terminology out here, the CAC. So a big function of the CAC is that it's a DFS function where the AP monitors a channel prior to transmitting to determine if any radar waveform is above any kind of DFS detection threshold, okay? And there's also another term, the CAC time. That's just the period of time that channel availability check must be done. And we're going to talk more about that in a minute. But basically, when an AP boots up for the first time, and let's say it's going to transmit on the DFS channel 100, before it can ever transmit, it must perform a channel availability check to listen if there's any existing radar already there. And there's actually 6 radar waveform types that are tested for DFX certification, 5 short pulse and 1 long pulse. And then the regulatory bodies have very specific guidelines on how to perform this testing, like a minimum percentage of successful detection is required by defined repetitive test. Once again, this testing varies by region, and you should understand that. But it's, like I said, there can be as many as 6 radar waveforms that are tested right there. So let's get into this a little deeper. So let's just say an AP boots up for the first time, and it wants to transmit on, say, channel 100. So it must perform a CAC. And for the first time, that CAC time must be 60 seconds. So the AP actually has to listen for 60 seconds before it can start transmitting. Now, once it listens for a full 60 seconds during the CAC time, well, let's just say this. Let's say if it does hear radar pulse. Well, it can't transmit. So it'll move on to another channel. It'll try a different channel. Okay, it's that simple. But if it goes for that initial 60 seconds and no radar pulses are detected, the AP can start transmitting, and it'll start transmitting out beacon management frames and announcing that it's there. And that's kind of a way of it to signal to clients that might be doing passive scanning about its existence. Clients actually don't do this. Clients have to rely on hearing the AP before they can transmit. Clients don't go and listen for 60 seconds before they start transmitting. They're basically listening for that master device, the AP, and if that's their signal that everything's clear after the CAC assessment, and then you can start having Wi-Fi communications. Now, the rules are a little bit different in Europe for 3 channels known as the terminal Doppler weather radar channels. Channels 120, 124, and 128. On those 3 channels, the initial CAC must be 10 full minutes, still 60 seconds on the other DFS channels, but 10 full minutes on these 3. So I'll never forget, I live in Atlanta, Georgia, but I had an AP here in my lab that had some European country code on it. And I was doing some testing, and I turned it on to channel like 124, and it didn't broadcast, and I couldn't figure out what was going on. And then suddenly after 10 minutes, it started broadcasting, and then it went like that. It's like, now it's the rules and the regulations. So be aware of that. So now, the other thing that you need to understand is the monitoring for radar pulses does not end once an AP starts transmitting. It continues. It has to constantly monitor. So whenever an AP is not transmitting, it's listening. And if it detects any of those 6 radar pulses again, guess what? It has to leave the channel, and it has to have a method to tell the clients that are connected to the AP that they have to leave as well. And so if a radar pulse is detected above the DFS detection threshold, the AP and all the associated clients, they have to leave the channel. That's the rules. We cannot interfere. It's all about radar avoidance and not interfering with radar. So that's what's going to happen. And if an AP, once again, detects something above one of those thresholds, the AP is going to inform all the clients we have to move to a different channel using what is called a channel switch announcement. So it's a frame transmission. It can either be beacon frames, action frames, or probe response frames. But it's basically a quick way to say, hey, there's radar, we gotta go. So now, a little bit more on how this channel switch announcement works. The AP and the clients have a channel move time that is defined of up to 10 seconds to leave. Now, in all the testing I've done, it's well under a second, okay? Although different vendors do it differently, and the AP can send multiple channel switch announcements to ensure that all the clients hear it and know that they need to leave. Once they're informed, once the clients are informed by that channel switch announcement, they know they got to leave as well, okay? And like I said, the rules say it's up to 10 seconds, but it's usually much quicker. It's a coordinated move, okay, to avoid interfering with radar. Now, very often you'll see them go to a non-DFS channel, very often channel 36, but it varies from vendor to vendor. And we can talk more about that, but they got to go, they have to move. This is actually a frame capture of a frame sequence of a channel switch announcement. And you can see right here, it actually uses action frames. And there's a channel switch announcement information element where basically this AP was transmitting on channel 100, and it's actually telling them that they all need to go to a different, actually it was transmitting on channel 64, and then it tells them they all have to move to a different channel if you were to dig deep into the frames. Additionally, after those initial action frames, there are a series of beacon frames that are transmitted out. And in this case, you're basically seeing 7 beacon frames, and then you can see a countdown. And basically it's saying, hey, we got to go, and we're going to leave in about 7 beacon frames, and everybody needs to leave at that time. And you can actually see that countdown in this channel switch count. So at the end of that last beacon frame, the AP and all the clients move away from channel 64 to whatever channel it was told to move to. Let's just say channel 36. Let's actually take a look at this to show you a radar pulse and a channel switch right here. So this is a spectrum analyzer view. So let's take a quick little look at this. And so here you see a channel right here, and it's broadcasting out on 5 gigahertz. And pretty soon you're going to see a radar pulse. There you go. And boom, you'll notice that the AP just left. I'll just show that again one more time in case you missed it. And if you look down in the bottom, you can see a packet capture down in the bottom. I don't know if you'll be able to catch and see the action frames. Actually, you can kind of see them right there. This is talking about the channel switch right there. But bottom line is here, if I click that, you'll see that. And there's an AP transmitting. Here comes the pulse right about now. And there's the action frames down there in the bottom, and the beacon frames counting down the switch count saying, hey, you got to leave. Okay. And then you saw the AP leave, and any clients that were connected to it also left. Okay. Go to the next slide. All right. Now, let's say I've jumped to, and I'm an AP, and I've told all my clients, and we had to go to channel 36. Okay, so we all jumped to channel 36. Now, what if they want to return back to their original channel, which I think was 64 in the example I had before? They can't for at least 30 minutes. So that's the rules. And this is known as the non-occupancy time. Now, eventually, when that 30 minutes expires, very often you will see that AP return to its original channel, or at least attempt to. Okay. Now, I want you to think about that, though. If this AP before was on a DFS channel number 64 and it heard radar and it came to 36, and then it wanted to return to channel 64, what would it have to do first? It would have to go to channel 64 again and go listen for how long? 60 seconds. Okay. It would have to listen for 60 seconds to reassess to see if that radar is still there. And if the radar is still there, it can't go back. But if the radar has gone away, theoretically, it could go back. Now, problem with that is that now you have a 60-second period where you've basically stranded your clients that were communicating on channel 36. And that's what I was just talking about in that top bullet right there. So you're going to have that 60-second interval when the AP is not going to be servicing clients when it's trying to switch back to its original channel. Now, one chipset vendor, Broadcom, offers a solution called zero-weight DFS that could potentially be used to solve this problem. Zero-weight DFS can be used for actually several different things, but here's one thing that it can be used for. So let's say, and it's taking advantage of the fact that today's modern APs have multiple radio chains. So let's say you have a 4x4 AP access point, and it's had to move from channel 100 to channel 36. And then but after 30 minutes expires, it would like to return to its original channel 100. Well, it could continue to service the clients in channel 36 using 3 of the radio chains, but because it's a 4x4 MIMO radio, it can use one of those radio chains to simply go listen on channel 100 again to see if there is any radar. And if it doesn't hear anything, you can then switch back to the original channel. The whole point of this is that you can still be servicing your clients on channel 36 before you make a jump back and have to do that new CAC assessment. Okay. And then once that's the case, they can tell the clients with another channel switch announcement for positive reasons to move back to channel 100. Once again, it must be clear. It basically has to be an all clear CAC assessment. So, one of the questions I get a lot is what channels do they fall back to? So if I'm an AP and I'm on channel 100 and I hear radar, what channel am I going to go to? Well, all vendors do this differently. Typically they should be going to non-DFS channels when they jump from a DFS channel. Some vendors, like this is actually our screenshot from our wing APs, actually give you the capabilities to select fallback channels if radar is detected. So you can select very specific channels that you would like the APs to fall back to. Most vendors don't do this. Good choice might be channel 165 actually in some cases, because channel 165 is not used in a lot of people's channel plans. So that might be a good choice. So this is giving you a little bit of food for thought there. And I want you to think about 40 megahertz channels in DFS. And this is kind of interesting, okay? So, I'm in 5 gigahertz, we could have a whole nother webinar on whether to use 40 megahertz channels or not in 5 gigahertz. And it can be done. 40 megahertz design in 5 gigahertz can be done, but only if you have the DFS channels available, because you cannot prevent CCI if you don't have the DFS channels available if you're using 40 megahertz channels. So you got to have the DFS channels to be honest with you if you're going to use 40 megahertz. And then there's some other very specific 40 megahertz design rules like thick walls and lower power, but it can be done. It can be done, and 40 megahertz can work if you know what you're doing. But what happens if radar is detected on either the primary or secondary channel of a 40 megahertz channel? So the primary channel is used for beacon frames and control frames, and the secondary channel and the primary and secondary channel are used together to carry data. So how is that going to work if radar is detected? So if radar is detected on either of those channels, okay, how is the jump going to work? Well, it depends on the vendor. So vendor A, we saw jump from a 40 megahertz channel to another 40 megahertz channel after the radar event, okay? And then after a 30-minute non-occupancy time, they returned to their original 40 megahertz channel. Now, here's a different vendor. They were on their 40 megahertz channel. They detected a radar event, but they jumped to a 20 megahertz channel after the radar event. Now, is that a good or a bad thing? It depends on your point of view. I actually think that this is actually a good thing, because if you're jumping to a 20 megahertz channel, potentially what happens if you jump from one 40 megahertz to another 40 megahertz, or even from 40 to 20, you start to upset the channel reuse patterns of existing surrounding APs. And if you're jumping 40 to 40, that's going to have a greater impact on those existing APs, because now you might actually be introducing co-channel interference as a result of the jump. So now we did notice that that vendor jumped back to the 40 megahertz right after that. So personally, I would like to see vendors give you the option to do this. So if you have 40 megahertz, give them the option to jump to a 40 or a 20, but then always return back to the original 40 megahertz. So once again, there's no set rules on this. You might see different vendor behaviors. Now, one thing you should consider is don't confuse DFS channel changes with the channel changes that happen with the adaptive RF or radio resource management protocols that every vendor has. Okay, every vendor has them, including Extreme, but where APs listen to the environment and they adjust their power settings lower or higher, or they change channels based on changing conditions. And every vendor does that. That has nothing to do with DFS, okay? So you might see channel changes based on just other types of interference and our CRC thresholds, okay? But it didn't have anything to do with radar, okay? And you should understand that, because people will say, well, how come I got channel changes and I'm not even have the DFS channels on? Well, it's your adaptive RF algorithm that's doing that, okay? Now, here's the thing, though. RRM algorithms need to be aware of DFS. So because radar events and DFS, I was kind of alluding to this in the last slide, radar events and DFS channel changes may affect both immediate and future radio resource management and adaptive RF management decisions. So you need to understand that. So the better vendors that have their RRM protocols also are going to tie in the mandated channel changes that is required for DFS and tie that into their protocols and their algorithms. Very important, okay? So let's talk a little bit more about 5 gigahertz in general. You know, I mentioned 2.4 gigahertz is the best band. And if you're going to be a best effort band, and if you're going to be using voice grade or voice over Wi-Fi over the Wi-Fi network, 2.4 gigahertz is a disaster zone. The experience is just not going to be good. You're going to get lots of choppy audio and bad communications. That's why most voice over Wi-Fi phone vendors like SpectraLink and Vocera and Escom, they all have 5 gigahertz phones now, okay? They're gonna be much happier, put the voice on 5 gigahertz. I mean, as a matter of fact, once again, you should be putting most everything on 5 gigahertz. As I mentioned, 2.4 is the best effort band, okay? So voice grade networks, let's put it on that. But it gets a little complicated because remember, a phone, if it's any kind of phone, is going to be mobile. So it's going to be anything a mobile device is going to be doing a lot of probing. So if you're going to be doing voice and a lot of probing, clients can't probe on the 5 gigahertz on the DFS channels. Okay, they have to rely on hearing the beacons. So a lot of the voice over Wi-Fi vendors for their phones recommend not using the DFS channels, or maybe only using a subset of the DFS channels. Okay, and the other big recommendation is hopefully they support 802.11k mechanisms. So make sure you have those on your APs turned on as well if you're doing voice or anytime really, because what 802.11k will do, it will send what are called neighbor reports about to these phones and other Wi-Fi devices that are basically recommended roaming reports. So it might say, hey, yeah, you might be on channel 36, but we know of another AP that's right next to you that's on channel 100 and it's already there. And that way the client doesn't have to listen, and because it can't probe on channel 100 anyway, and the client can make that roam if it decides to do that. So 802.11k is absolutely necessary if you're going to be doing voice over Wi-Fi. And you might want to consider the recommendations of the voice over Wi-Fi manufacturer as well, maybe a limited set of DFS channels. What about DFS and outdoor? You know, should you use it outdoors? Well, it's interesting enough. DFS is very often a lot easier. Radar events are a lot easier to detect if you're outdoors because you don't have the attenuation of the walls. So a lot of times in point-to-point bridge links and mesh links, the vendors have recommendations not to use the DFS channels. Okay, because think about it: if you have a link that's on channel 100, and what's the guarantee that both those are going to go to the same channel? Okay, and I have found that a lot of vendors, outdoor equipment, cannot. I mean, basically it's two APs, right? Meshing to each other or bridging to each other. They're not clients. So the channel switch announcements don't work with each other. So very often what you see, if there's a radar event, you might see them go to different channels. And that's not good. And then it takes a while to reestablish that bridge link or that mesh link. So we need better enhancements for that. We need some sort of synchronized DFS events between bridge links and mesh APs if we're going to be using DFS more outdoors. But for indoors, I highly, highly, highly recommend it. And we'll see enhancements outdoors as well. I'm going to give a plug right here to a little tool that became available about a few earlier this year by a company called Nuts About Nets. These guys are some friends of mine that made a really cool diagnostic tool called WifiMETRIX, and it can do a lot of RF diagnostics, but one thing it has built into it is a radar simulator, and it can simulate radar events. And by doing that, you can test the DFS capabilities of your vendor's APs. And myself and some other friends did a lot of testing on not only Extreme APs, but also on a lot of other vendor APs. And we came to a lot of conclusions that I'm going to show you here in a minute. But even if you're a big enterprise company and you have, 1,000 APs or something, I'd recommend you spend the money to buy this and do a little bit of testing with this. It's an outstanding device to have in your Wi-Fi troubleshooting and diagnostics toolkit. Pardon me. So some observations, some of the testing that I did, and we did on DFS using that WifiMETRIX and other using other testing devices. Vendors implement the channel switch announcements differently. They have different channel move times. Some will be very quick. Some will be a little bit longer. They're all quick. They're all under a second as opposed to 10 seconds, but some do it differently and some do it better than others. And I won't get into all the details, but some of the methods that I saw some vendors did, I thought where they had the potential of stranding the clients or they would have the clients move to the channel before the AP moved, and that just was not very good. So some of they might have been legal with the FCC and regulatory body regulations, but their actual methods that they were using to achieve that very often weren't optimal. By the way, even within a single vendor, they might have different AP models, and different AP models don't always yield the same results. So you'll see the behavior. They all try to abide by the rules, okay? But how they do the jumping and how they might jump back, or if they go from 40 to 20 or 40 to 40, that might be different even between different models of different APs. Once again, this is why a test tool like that is very, very valuable. So like I said, different AP models from the same vendor may perform differently. And you know what? Even from one vendor, changes in firmware may affect channel switch announcements and move time. So you might have firmware on an AP and the new firmware comes out and now it's not doing as well as it was before. Or in a lot of cases, the vendor has fixed a bug where their DFS detection thresholds were causing too many false positives, and they fixed that and it's gotten better. So, firmware fixes don't always cause bugs. They actually do fix bugs sometimes as well. I know that sometimes people find that hard to believe. Okay. As I mentioned, vendors perform differently when 40 megahertz channels are used. Okay. Some might jump 40 to 40, some 40 to 20. And RRM algorithms are aware and are affected by DFS. That is important. But keep in mind, every vendor's RRM algorithm is different. And not all clients obey the channel switch announcements, and that is not good. They're supposed to, but occasionally you'll see something where a client hears channel switch announcement and it doesn't jump, and then all of a sudden it finds itself stranded, and then it'll start having to probe on non-DFS channels. So that's not a good thing. That's a client's fault. There's not really much you can do about that. So be aware of that. Now, let's get into some other things and a little bit more about design, why I've been talking so much about DFS channels. And the whole point of this is I want you to use them. I want you to use them in your channel plan. And we have some creative ways that you can use them, and we'll talk more about that. Remember that 2.4 gigahertz is a best effort band. So in a lot of situations, you'll see literally where there's one AP per room, like in K through 12 education. I'm not saying that has to be done. I'm just saying in a lot of cases for capacity needs that is done, okay? And if that's the case, I guarantee you, if you're gonna make the 2.4 gigahertz network even usable, you're turning off 2 out of 3 or 3 out of every 4 2.4 gigahertz radios. You're going to leave the 5 gigahertz radios on, and you can have a nice little channel plan, but you got to turn off the bulk of the 2.4 gigahertz radios simply to avoid code channel interference. Now, instead of doing that, Extreme offers an option called Dual 5 gigahertz, and this has been a big winner for us. So if you're a current Extreme customer, you're already well aware of this. But this is a great, great option that we've been building into a lot of our APs and will continue to do so. So an SSR radio is simply this. It can switch between, it stands for software selectable radio. It can switch between 2.4 gigahertz and 5 gigahertz. So imagine you have two radios in an AP. One is a fixed 5 gigahertz radio. So it only can transmit on 5 gigahertz and it's on channel 40. Then you have another one that's software selectable, and that's a 2.4 gigahertz, and it's transmitting on channel 6. Now, algorithm, you can either statically do this, or you can use your RRM algorithms, where based on changing conditions, that software selectable radio can move to another 5 gigahertz radio. Now, how cool is that? And why that is cool is because now you have 2 channels in the good band that offers you a lot better performance as opposed to the best effort band on 2.4 gigahertz. And you're going to be getting great capacity needs. And I'll go back to this slide right here where you had to turn off a lot of the 2.4 radios. Okay. wouldn't it be much better if you could just, instead of turning them off, if you could convert those into a secondary 5 gigahertz radio and basically double your capacity needs? And that's the awesomeness of what dual 5 gigahertz can provide you. But bottom line is, it starts getting complex with basically, if you have dual 5 gigahertz radios, you effectively have 2 layers of 5 gigahertz channel plans, and you need to make sure that they're not interfering with each other and causing CCI, which means your RRM algorithms need to account for that, which also means you're probably going to need all the DFS channels. If you're going to do, I promise you need to use the DFS channels if you're using, in most cases, if you're doing dual 5 gigahertz. And some quick little rules about dual 5 gigahertz in general. If you're using software definable, or they're sometimes called software definable radios or software selectable radios, you cannot have the radios within that are housed in the same AP interfere with each other. So rule number 1 is you need at least 60 megahertz. You need at least 3 megahertz of 3 times the channel size of separation between the two. So you can't have an AP on channel 36 and an AP on channel 40. They will interfere with each other right there in the AP. So you need the separation between the 2 radios in the AP. If it's 20 megahertz, a minimum of 60 megahertz separation, I'd probably recommend more like 80. But a minimum of 60. And the pairings, if you can, if possible, you can't always do this, but if possible, sometimes if you could pair it with a DFS channel with a non-DFS channel, if you can pair this. Now, the RRM algorithms usually take care of this for you, and they're pretty good at taking care of this, but very often you're doing it statically. That's why you need to know these things. So if you're doing a static plan, you need to know that you need to have separation, and you might also want you might also want to pair DFS with non-DFS channels. Think of it as 2 layers of 5 gigahertz channel planning, okay? And having those DFS channels available makes this easier. I also am not, except in some very, very rare corner cases, I would not highly recommend against using dual 5 gigahertz with 40 megahertz channels. Only do it with 20 megahertz channels. Okay. Now, what about DFS and radar events with dual 5 gigahertz? So here I have a software definable radio that's on channel 100, and another one, a fixed radio on channel 36. And what if a radar event was detected on channel 100, which is a DFS channel? Okay, it has to move, right? So it will move. In this case, it jumped to channel 157, another non-DFS channel. Okay, now here's the key. Your algorithms, once again, need to be smart. So the last thing you would want to happen is if this AP was on a DFS channel on channel 100 and the other radio was on channel 36 and it switched to channel 40. Because if it switched to channel 40, now the 2 radios in the dual 5 gigahertz would be interfering with each other. Now, the good news is we take that into account in our algorithm. So right here, you see that AP, that software selectable radio that was on channel 100, and DFS found the radar on channel 100, okay? And we do, our algorithm does cost calculations, okay? And based on those cost calculations, it moved the AP up to channel 157, and as opposed to putting it on a channel, you can see right there, channels 36, 40, 44, and 48 were high cost because they would interfere with the other existing radio in the AP, and that's why they put it on a good channel. So once again, I'll just keep getting to this point. Your DFS needs to work with your RRM algorithms, whether you're using dual 5 gigahertz or not, okay? The other thing I'm very, very proud of is in ExtremeCloud IQ, our cloud monitoring solution, is our DFS visibility, and we're getting better. One of the biggest complaints I've had for years, and lots of people have had for years, is there's been 0 visibility when DFS happens in management systems. And we've added this about over a year ago into ExtremeCloud IQ, where not only can you see power and channel changes based on just anything, but you can also see DFS events, okay, when they occur. By default, we offer 90 days worth of timeline visibility for everything in the cloud, including DFS, but we recently announced unlimited visibility as well in the cloud. So literally, if you had unlimited, if you signed up for an unlimited account, which by the way is no extra cost, you could see, you can have a permanent record of DFS events that go back years. And that's pretty cool, providing that visibility. We also do it, show you a view of APs with the most DFS events too. So, and we also do it all the way down to a single AP level. So, I might ask you a question like, what would be considered like, what would be normal amount of DFS events in a week? And somebody said like 50. I mean, that would be a bad number. I mean, said maybe 1, that might be acceptable. Okay. The other thing I get asked all the time is, well, what happens if I'm doing this monitoring and I keep seeing a DFS event on channel 100? What do I do about that? Well, it's real simple. You plan around it. You change your channel plan, okay? You can, most vendors, including Extreme, have an option where you can exclude that channel. So if you're in an area where one or a couple of channels are negatively impacted by radar and they keep getting moved, just remove those channels permanently for your channel plan and you'll stop the bouncing around, okay? And that's very important in terms of design, okay? Now, historically, the biggest problem with using DFS channels has been false positive detections of radar. So a bird flaps its wings in the air and the radar, the AP misinterprets that and they think it's a radar pulse and it tells all the clients to move to channel 36. And this has historically been a problem. And I'll be honest with you, and I came from the Aerohive acquisition back in the early days of, we had some really bad problems with false positives where all the APs were going the same channels. Our thresholds were too sensitive, so I could cough and the AP would change. So we had 4 or 5 problems. Now, for the most part, we have fixed all those, and other vendors do the same thing. They find false positives and fix them, and we're always tweaking them. But the early days of DFS, that was another reason the DFS channels were never used, because the APs just there was too many false positives. But I can proudly say at Extreme, we've got that, and never 100% perfect, but pretty good, sorted out, and working very, very well in terms of false positives. And it's getting better. So we're doing lots of stuff. And one of the advantages of the cloud is all the data you take in. So in ExtremeCloud IQ, we take in something like 5 terabytes of data every day from all our customer, which is the equivalent of about 66 years of very high definition video streaming data. And that's how much data we take in every year. And then we metadata, and then we do analytics on it. And we're doing a lot of creative stuff with machine learning right now. And one of the things we're looking at very, very heavily is DFS. And we've already found some interesting things some of it's just stuff that we make improvements in the background that you never notice to our firmware and code, but other things that we'll be making visible in the future as well. And probably you might even see in the future, we'll be making some recommendations to customers and on how they can improve their network. And here's one. Remember I said there's lots of customers that never turn on the DFS channels? Well, we could very easily say, hey, based on what we're saying, why aren't you using the DFS channels? And once again, the customers didn't even know they were there, because especially in the United States, they're off by default, until they're certified. So you got to turn those channels on. As we wrap it up here, I do want to give a couple of plugs here. And that is number 1, this little Dummies booklet that I authored about Wi-Fi 6. It is free. You can download your free digital ebook copy right here. So if you want to scan that QR code or just type in that URL, or just type in Wi-Fi 6 for Dummies and Extreme, you'll be taken straight there. So it's about an 80-page booklet about Wi-Fi 6 and all the high efficiency enhancements. And 802.11ax and Wi-Fi 6 operates in 5 gigahertz. And another shameless plug here too, the 6th edition of the SIPEX CWNA study guide that I co-author is now available for pre-order on Amazon. So you can pick that up right now and pre-order it, and it'll probably be shipping in a January or February timeframe. Now, before we get to some questions, I just want to summarize a few things. And I just want to say, I started off this conversation talking about 6 gigahertz. And yes, 6 gigahertz is on the way, okay? It is coming, and it's wonderful, and it's going to be great, okay? But guys and gals, it's not going to solve all our problems. Initially, 6 gigahertz, I think the first use case for it is going to be a lot of meshing capabilities, because it will take a while for the clients to enter the client population. And if you look at things historically, and this is just a fact, the 15 billion Wi-Fi legacy clients that are out there aren't going away anytime soon, and they will not be able to connect to 6 gigahertz. So, and so what that means is, 6 gigahertz is going to open up a lot of things for us, and we're all excited about it. But 5 gigahertz for now, and for a long time, 5 gigahertz is your best friend. And that's why we had this conversation today. So with that, I think I'm actually a little bit ahead of time. So Mr. Mitch, do we have any questions today?
Yes, we do have a few questions, and thank you, David. We'll go ahead and take some time for questions at the moment. Just a reminder, please be sure to type your questions using the Q&A window on your screen. So the first question we have is, when you see a DFS channel change, what behaviors and which channels do they typically jump to?
Good questions. And once again, it really depends on the vendors. In the early days, almost every vendor always had them go to channel 36. Okay. Now, the problem with that is that if it affected, like, say, 10 APs, they would all jump to channel 36. And you see a problem with that, then now you had 10 APs on the same channel, and now you had a co-channel interference problem. Okay. I still see some vendors doing that. We used to do that 6-7 years ago. Okay, we don't do that anymore. The way we do it now is we jump around to a variety of channels. Okay, so one AP, if it jumps, might go to 36. Another AP might go to channel 157. Another AP might go to channel 48. Okay, and then so it's an algorithm. It's kind of pseudo random, and they kind of jump around. But once again, that's kind of why I would go back to the WifiMETRIX test tool. The only way you can find that is kind of do some testing on your own, because you will see different behaviors. I do like the idea of having a fallback channel too, and that's why I showed that slide earlier as well, being able to actually configure a single channel or a range of channels that you would like to recommend your APs to jump to. The only vendor that I know is doing that right now is the Wing APs that we offer at Extreme, but that is something honestly I wish every vendor would do. Okay.
Perfect. And the next question we have here is, what about using 80 megahertz size channels with DFS?
Okay, so a couple things on that. So first of all, in 5 gigahertz, 80 megahertz does not work in the enterprise, period. Never has. There's not enough frequency space. If you use 80 megahertz channels in 5 gigahertz band with multiple APs, they're going to interfere with each other, and there's going to be co-channel interference. Additionally, every time you use channel bonding, for every time you bond a channel, it raises the noise floor 3 dB. So if you're doing an 80 megahertz channel, it's raised the noise floor 6 dB, which means your signal to noise levels have gone down, and you're using actually lower modulation and coding schemes. So you're going to have CCI, and you're going to have a lower SNR. So 80 megahertz works fine if you have it in one room, okay, and it's isolated from everything else. But if you're using it in 5 gigahertz in the enterprise has never been a recommended practice, and it's probably just going to cause you problems. So don't use DFS with 80 megahertz channels in the DFS frequency band. Don't use them anywhere in 5 gigahertz. Now, that being said, I will put, for when 6 gigahertz comes out, there's going to be a lot more frequency space, and there's a lot of anticipation due to the new power spectrum density rules that 80 megahertz might become usable in 6 gigahertz in the future. The other thing to keep in mind is there's no radar in 6 gigahertz, so there is no DFS there. So, so that'll be a good thing. 80 megahertz will probably be usable in 6 gigahertz, and there is no DFS. But keep in mind, once again, there's no clients. There's no clients now, and even if there was a billion clients tomorrow in 6 gigahertz, there's still 15 billion clients that will never operate in the 6 gigahertz band.
Perfect. And we have time for one more question here. The last question was, is there any situation where you would not use DFS channels?
I've seen people that were near airports or shipping ports where they just turned them all off because they just didn't want to deal with it. And if they want to make that decision, fine. Yeah, a couple. If your vendor's having a horrible problem with false positives, yeah, don't use it. That's one situation. The other situation is more just a design, and I kind of alluded to this earlier. If you're in an area that's being affected by radar events, typically it's not going to affect all the DFS channels. It's going to affect one of the DFS channels or a subset of the DFS frequency space. Eliminate those channels from your channel plan. It's that simple. Don't be scared of the DFS channels. And probably the third one, and I also alluded to this as well, if I have a voice over Wi-Fi network, I'm going to maybe make sure I have 802.11k on and maybe use a subset of DFS channels as opposed to all of them. But look at the recommendations of your voice over Wi-Fi manufacturer. And then I also alluded to, and you might want to do some testing on this, a point-to-point bridge link. You might not want to use a DFS channel unless you can prove that if there's a radar event and there's some sort of synchronized jump. Okay, so those are a lot of different situations, and hopefully we're going to be addressing and making a lot of those better. But proper channel planning and just being aware of the DFS and plan around it is basically what I'm trying to say.
Perfect. And that's all the time we have for today's webinar. So thank you again for your time in participating today. You will receive our follow-up email within the next 24 hours with a link to the on-demand recording.
Thanks, everybody. Hope to see you again soon for another webinar.